The grandfather clock in the hall ticked its steady, mournful rhythm, each second a hammer blow against the profound silence that had filled the house since Evelyn's passing. I, Robert Vance, 64 years old, stood at the window of my study, watching the last of the funeral guests' cars disappear down the long, oak-lined driveway. The scent of her perfume, a faint whisper of jasmine and vanilla, still clung to the armchair where she'd last sat, a ghostly presence in the room we had shared for 38 years. The cancer had been merciless, but it was a known enemy. The betrayal that was coming, I sensed, would be far colder. The reception had been a masterclass in subdued hypocrisy. Her children, Thomas, with his politician's smile, Helen, with her calculated tears, and Daniel, my stepson, who seemed to float through it all in a daze, had performed their grief with practiced precision. The true performance, however, came from Daniel's wife, Cassandra. I watched her move through the crowded rooms, a panther in a black designer dress, her eyes not red from weeping, but sharp, assessing. They flicked over the artwork, the first edition books, the subtle, undeniable signs of wealth that this house contained. She was taking inventory. For decades, I had been content in the role they had assigned me, the quiet, intellectual husband, the retired history professor who had married into this life. They saw Evelyn as the dynamo, the brilliant CEO who had built the successful consulting firm that bore her name. They saw me as the pleasant, peripheral beneficiary. They never knew, never bothered to ask about the late-night strategy sessions, the complex financial models I built, the quiet, steady hand that had guided her hand. Our partnership was the deepest truth of our marriage, and it was a truth we had kept private, a fortress against the world. Now, with Evelyn gone, the fortress was under siege. I was polishing the brass telescope we'd used to map the constellations from this very window when I heard their footsteps. Not the hesitant steps of mourners, but the confident, purposeful tread of a delegation. I did not turn. "Robert," Cassandra's voice cut through the quiet, "we need to talk." I finished my deliberate circle with the cloth before setting it down and facing them. They stood in the doorway, a united front, Cassandra, with Daniel hovering just behind her shoulder, and Thomas and Helen flanking them. The children I had helped raise, now arrayed against me. "The funeral was beautiful," I said, my voice even. "Evelyn would have been touched." "It's over now," Cassandra stated, her tone dismissing the sentiment. "And it's time for practicalities. This house, Evelyn's estate, the family's future." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. What practicalities? Thomas cleared his throat, unable to meet my eyes. "The house, Robert, it's far too much for one person. The taxes, the upkeep, it's a burden. We think it's best if you start looking for a place more suitable." Suitable, the word was a blade. "This is my home. I've lived here for 20 years. Evelyn and I built this life together." "Did you?" Cassandra's smile was a thin, bloodless line. "Let's be honest with each other, Robert. You were her husband, and we're grateful for the companionship you provided. But you didn't build this. Evelyn built this. You were just here." Just here, the dismissal was so absolute, so cruel, it stole the air from my lungs. 38 years of shared dreams, of private jokes, of supporting her through the brutal ascent of her career, of being the calm center in her storm, reduced to 3 syllables. I looked at Daniel, my boy, the one I'd taught to ride a bike, to appreciate Shakespeare, to be a man. He studied the pattern on the Persian rug as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Evelyn left a will," I managed, my throat tight. "And we will, of course, honor whatever small provision she made for you," Cassandra said, waving a hand as if swatting a fly. "But the bulk of her assets, her legacy, belongs to the family, to her blood. It's what she would have wanted." Helen nodded, her face a mask of feigned sympathy. "It's about the children, Robert. Their education, their futures. We have to be practical." The audacity was breathtaking. They were not just asking for my home. They were rewriting history, erasing my role, reducing me to a pensioner they needed to relocate for their own convenience. "I want you to pack your things tonight," Cassandra said, her voice dropping into a tone of finality. "Daniel and I will stay to manage the transition. It will be simpler if the family handles Evelyn's affairs directly." The command hung in the air. I looked from one face to another, seeing not grief but greed, seeing not family but a boardroom takeover. "Where would you have me go?" I asked, the question a whisper. Cassandra's shrug was a masterpiece of contempt. "There are excellent retirement communities, assisted living facilities. I'm sure you'll find something appropriate for your situation." Assisted living, the final insult. They saw me as a used-up commodity, a piece of furniture to be moved into storage. And in that moment, something broke inside me. The grief, the hurt, the betrayal, it all crystallized into a cold, diamond-hard clarity. They thought they were dealing with a harmless old man. They had no idea who they were truly dealing with. "Okay," I said. The silence was instantaneous and profound. They had been braced for a fight, for tears, for pleas. My calm acquiescence disarmed them completely. "Okay," Cassandra repeated, thrown. "I'll pack tonight. I'll be gone by morning." I turned my back on them, a deliberate act of dismissal, and listened as their shocked whispers erupted behind me, followed by the quick, retreating click of Cassandra's heels. The siege was over. They thought they had won. They had no idea they had just declared war on a man with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. I went upstairs and packed 2 suitcases with a methodical, unhurried precision. I took my clothes, my shaving kit, a few cherished photographs, and the small, locked metal box from the back of my closet. I left behind everything else, the books, the research, the artifacts from a lifetime of academic and personal pursuit. Let them think that was all there was. Let them believe the quiet professor was walking away with nothing but his dignity and a few changes of clothes. As dawn broke, I loaded the suitcases into the trunk of my car, a modest sedan they had always quietly looked down upon. I did not look back at the house. I drove to a pay-by-the-week motel on the outskirts of the city, a place of cracked asphalt and flickering neon. I paid in cash. I was now a ghost. In the sterile, dimly lit room, I opened the metal box. Inside were not sentimental trinkets, but a secure satellite phone, a slim laptop, and a single, embossed business card. Julian Croft-esque, attorney. On the back, in Evelyn's elegant script, was written, "When they show you who they are, believe them. Then, my love, show them who you are." I powered on the laptop and made the calls. "Julian," I said when he answered. "Robert," his voice was a calm, deep harbor in the storm. "I've been expecting your call. Evelyn, she was certain it would come to this." "Initiate the Ethelred Protocol," I said, the name we'd chosen for its meaning, noble counsel. But in history, King Ethelred was known as the Unready. I was more than ready. "Understood," Julian replied, and I could hear the tapping of keys. "The asset freeze is now in motion. They will find their access to all accounts, credit lines, and properties associated with the Evelyn Vance Trust has been revoked. The house, of course, was always in your name. They are trespassers." "Good, let them settle in. Let them try to command a staff that will no longer be paid. Let them try to use credit cards that will be declined. Let them feel the ground turn to sand beneath their feet." "And then?" Julian asked, though I knew he knew the answer. "Then," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel, "we serve the eviction notice, not just on the house, on their entire understanding of reality." I spent the next 3 days in that motel room, my command center. The laptop connected me to a world they could not imagine. The consulting firm was a shell, a pleasant fiction we had maintained. The true empire, Vance Holdings, was a labyrinthine network of trusts, holding companies, and strategic investments spanning 3 continents. I was the architect, the majority shareholder, the silent, beating heart of it all. Evelyn had been the brilliant public face, the charismatic leader. I was the strategist in the shadows, and now the shadows were receding. The calls started on the second day. First Daniel, his voice confused. "Dad, there's some weird stuff happening with the bank accounts. The housekeeper says her check bounced. Can you come back and help us sort this out?" I deleted the message. Then Thomas, his tone shifting from confusion to frustration. "Robert, what's going on? My card was declined at the country club. This is embarrassing. We need to talk." I did not respond. The third day brought Cassandra, her message a sharp, demanding spike of anxiety. "Robert, this is no time for games. There are serious financial discrepancies. You need to return to the house immediately and explain what you know." I smiled, a thin, grim expression with no warmth. The trap was closing. They were finally asking the right questions, but they were asking the wrong person. They were still talking to the professor. They had yet to meet the king. Have you ever had that moment? The moment where someone you trusted, someone you considered family, looks right through you, where they treat your kindness as weakness, your quiet nature as a vacancy, that cold, hollow feeling in your chest. That's where Robert is right now. He's not just a grieving widower. He's a man who has been systematically erased by the people he loved. But what they don't know, what they're about to learn, is that the quietest man in the room is often the most dangerous. He's been taking notes, and now it's time to settle the account. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been made to feel small, then you understand why what happens next isn't just about revenge. It's about restoration. Stay with me. The formal reading of the will was scheduled at Julian's insistence. He held it in his firm's main conference room, a space designed to awe and intimidate with its floor-to-ceiling windows and breathtaking city views. I arrived precisely on time, dressed not in the comfortable tweed they expected, but in a dark, impeccably tailored suit that spoke of boardrooms, not classrooms. I was no longer playing the part they had written for me. They were already there, huddled on one side of the vast, polished table. Cassandra trying to project an aura of control, but with a nervous tick in her jaw. Thomas, flushed with anger. Helen looking lost. Daniel just pale and scared. Their lawyer, a man named Peterson with a perpetually damp forehead, fidgeted with his papers. Julian began the proceedings with a sonorous voice that filled the room. He read through the standard clauses, the small charitable bequests Evelyn had always supported. Then he reached the core of the document. To my beloved stepchildren, Thomas, Helen, and Daniel, he read, his voice unwavering, I leave the sum of $100,000 each to be dispersed from my personal accounts. A wave of tension passed through them. It was a significant amount of money, but it was not life-changing. It was not what they expected. Cassandra could not contain herself. 100,000? That's absurd. What about the house, the business, the assets? Julian looked up, his gaze cool. The house, he said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table, was deeded solely to Robert Samuel Vance in 2010. It was never part of Evelyn's estate. Cassandra snatched the paper, her eyes scanning it rapidly, the blood drained from her face. This can't be right. As for the business, I said, speaking for the first time, my voice was calm, measured, and carried an authority that made them all freeze. The consulting firm was a passion project for Evelyn. It generates a modest income. It is not, and never was, the source of this family's wealth. They stared at me, utterly bewildered. Then what was? Thomas demanded, his voice rising. Where did it all come from? I nodded to Julian. He opened a second, much thicker file. The assets, Julian said, are held by Vance Holdings, a privately held international corporation. The sole voting shareholder and chairman of the board is Robert Samuel Vance. The name Vance Holdings landed in the room like a thunderclap. It was a name synonymous with influence and immense, quiet wealth. They knew the name, they just never connected it to the man sitting across from them. The biotech firm you invested in, Thomas, I said, locking eyes with him. My venture capital arm funded it. The art collection Helen so admires, acquired through my acquisitions department. The trust fund for the grandchildren, established and funded by me. I let the truth unfold, detail by devastating detail. I was not the beneficiary, I was the benefactor. The man they had tried to cast out into assisted living was the architect of the very world they took for granted. Cassandra looked at me, and for the first time I saw not contempt, but raw, undiluted fear. She was finally seeing me, not the professor, the power. You have 72 hours, I said, standing up, my voice cutting through their stunned silence, to vacate my property. You are trespassers. After that, the law will remove you. I walked out of the conference room, leaving them in the ruins of their own avarice. The door clicked shut behind me, a sound more final than any eulogy. The first battle was over. The war for my legacy, my identity, was just beginning, and I held all the high ground. The silence in the wake of my departure from Julian's office was more profound than any I had ever known. It wasn't the silence of an empty house, but the silence of a detonation's aftermath, the quiet where the shock sets in before the screaming starts. I didn't wait for the screams. I returned to my motel command center, the hum of the laptop a more comforting sound than any memory of that house. The chessboard was set. Their king was in check, and they were only just realizing the game had even begun. The 72-hour countdown commenced. I did not spend it idly. Through encrypted channels, I directed my corporate security team to discreetly monitor the property. The feed, displayed on a secondary screen, showed a panicked flurry of activity. Moving vans arrived, not the professional ones I would have hired, but ragged rental trucks. They were not carefully packing cherished heirlooms. They were hauling out furniture, electronics, even the wine from the cellar I had curated for 2 decades. It was not a move, it was a pillaging. Cassandra, I noted, supervised with a frantic energy, her gestures sharp and angry. Daniel moved like a ghost, carrying boxes with a slumped resignation that, despite everything, tugged at a forgotten paternal string in my heart. I severed it. Sentiment had nearly been my undoing. On the final day, at the 71st hour, my personal cell phone, the one only a handful of people had the number for, vibrated. It was Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. Dad, Robert. His voice was thick, broken. They're gone. Cassandra left an hour ago. She didn't even say goodbye, just took her things and left. Thomas and Helen cleared out yesterday. I'm the last one here. The house is empty. It feels dead. I'm so sorry. I don't know what else to say. I was weak. I was wrong. I deleted the message. An apology born of consequence, not conscience, was worthless. An hour later, the security feed showed his car, a sporty coupe Cassandra had chosen for him, pulling away for the last time. The house was still my house. The next morning, I met Julian and a locksmith at the property. The air was different. The psychic weight of their presence was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out stillness. The locksmith worked efficiently, the sharp clunk of new deadbolts a sound of finality. Julian handed me the new keys, their cold metal a tangible symbol of reclaimed sovereignty. The asset freeze is holding, he reported. They've retained counsel, of course. Peterson is making noises about contesting the will and the property transfer, claiming undue influence. I almost smiled. Evelyn transferred the house to me 12 years before her diagnosis. Let him try. They will, Julian said. They're desperate. Their liquid assets are frozen, their credit is frozen. The lifestyle they were living has evaporated overnight. Good, I said, my voice flat. Let them learn the value of $1 they had to earn. I did not move back in immediately. The house needed to be cleansed, not just of their physical presence, but of their memory. I hired a restoration crew, not cleaners. They stripped the rooms, repaired the scuffs and scrapes, repainted the walls in the colors Evelyn and I had chosen together. I had them install a state-of-the-art security system. The invisible man would no longer be vulnerable. Weeks turned into a month. I divided my time between the sterile motel and the slow, meticulous rebirth of my home. The legal war was a distant, tedious affair. Their challenges were predictably baseless, easily swatted aside by Julian's legal prowess. The true battle was the one waged in the silence of my own mind, the struggle between the cold fury that had sustained me and the flicker of something else, a weary pity. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the second call came, not to my cell, but to the new, secure landline I'd had installed in the house. I was in the library, supervising the placement of my books back on their shelves. The foreman handed me the phone. "A Mr. Croft for you, sir." "Robert," Julian's voice was somber. "It's Daniel. He's in the hospital. Car accident. Not serious, but he listed you as his emergency contact. The hospital just called my office as a secondary contact on some of the trust documents." The news landed not as a shock, but as an inevitability. A man whose life had been built on a foundation of sand was now feeling the first tremors of the collapse. I felt a responsibility, not to him, but to the boy he had been. "Which hospital?" I asked. I found him in a semi-private room, looking younger and more fragile than his 35 years. His left arm was in a cast, his face a mosaic of purple and yellow bruises. The bed next to his was empty. He was alone. He looked up as I entered. and his eyes, hazy with painkillers, widened in disbelief, then filled with a shame so profound it was almost physical. "You came," he whispered. "You called," I replied, not taking the seat by the bed, but standing at its foot, a deliberate distance between us. "They couldn't reach Cassandra, her number's disconnected, she's gone," he stated it as a flat, accepted fact. I was living in a studio apartment, I was distracted, ran a red light. "I'm sorry you were hurt," I said, and found I meant it. The dam broke then. The story tumbled out in a choked, medicated torrent. The frozen accounts, the humiliation, the frantic calls to lawyers, the realization that the financial world they knew had been a mirage. Cassandra's rage, her blame, her eventual quiet departure with the last of their joint savings. The complete and utter obliteration of the life he had known. "I knew," he sobbed, the words ragged. "That night when she told you to leave, I knew it was evil, I felt it in my gut, but I was a coward. I was so angry at Mom for leaving us so little, but she didn't, did she? She left us exactly what we deserved. Nothing." He was finally seeing the truth. It had taken utter ruin for his vision to clear. "What you deserved," I corrected gently, "was the opportunity to build your own life, Daniel, not to live off the labor and foresight of others. Your mother and I gave you every tool, every advantage. You chose to use them as a hammock, not a ladder." He nodded, the motion slow and painful. "Is there any way to fix this, with us?" I looked at this broken man, the ghost of the bright-eyed boy I'd loved, and felt the cold armor around my heart crack. Revenge was a desert, it offered no sustenance. What I craved now was order, justice, not vengeance. "The past is not a thing to be fixed," I said. "It is a lesson to be learned from. We can build something new, but it will be built on a new foundation. Truth, accountability, respect, not on entitlement and assumption." "What does that mean?" he asked, hope and fear warring in his eyes. "It means you will get no money from me, not a cent. The 100,000 from your mother's will is yours. It is a seed. What you grow from it is your responsibility. If you want a relationship with me, you will build it yourself. You will call, you will visit. You will be the man I know you can be, not the puppet your wife and your own greed created." It was the hardest lesson and the most merciful one I could offer. A handout would have perpetuated the cycle. This was a challenge, a chance for him to save himself. He was crying again, but this time it was different. It was a release. "I understand. Thank you, Robert. Thank you for not giving up on me completely." "I haven't," I said, and finally I stepped forward and placed a hand on his uninjured shoulder. "But the work is yours to do." I left him there, not with a solution, but with a path. A difficult, steep, and uncertain path, but it was a path. Weeks later, I was finally living in my home again. It was mine, truly mine, in a way it had never been before. The silence was no longer an enemy, but a companion. One evening, as I sat in my restored library, a fire crackling in the hearth, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Vance, this is Helen. I don't expect you to reply. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I'm taking a job in another city, starting over. Daniel told me what you said to him. He's right. We have to build our own lives. I hope one day I can deserve to speak to you again." I did not reply, but I did not delete the message. It was a start. The war was over. I had reclaimed my home, my fortune, my name, but the true victory was quieter. It was the peace that comes not from destroying your enemies, but from dismantling the prison of their expectations and walking out free. I had shown them who I was, and in doing so, I had finally remembered myself. There's a moment after the storm passes, when the air is clean and the world feels new. That's where Robert is now. He didn't just win a fight, he won back his own life. He learned that the most powerful revenge isn't destruction, it's living well. It's setting boundaries made of steel and having the peace to enjoy the silence. If you've ever had to rebuild, if you've ever had to show someone that you can't be erased, then you know this story isn't about money. It's about the unshakable value of your own spirit, what was taken from you, and more importantly, what will you do to take it back?